having a conference call with their conscience, and they contemplate whether or not Jesus is able to do just what he said. And I'm so glad that Jesus waited a while in this brother's life, and he waited a while in our lives, and he wiretapped their conference call and heard them trying to call him out, and I say, and prove it. And he proved it, he did. Because he proved it when he suffered and bled and died. He proved it when he carried the cross up Golgotha Hill. He proved it when he was nailed to the cross, suffered, bled, and died. And he proved it when he got up with all power in his hand. And because Jesus is able to do something for your life, he is able to do something through your life. And now it's your time. In light of the fact that Jesus saves and he has the authority to not only speak into our lives, but to work through them to evidence that he is Lord in his time and in his way. And none of us wants to miss our time by not doing what he says, when he says it, and how he says it. Then allow me some pen time to present to you 3 ideas relative to the subject. It's your time. I'll give them to you right up front because I want time limit, but that's okay. We're going to keep it under the time limit. We're going to get the word, amen, and we're going to be blessed to go home. The first point is I do what he says. Do what he says. Our second point is that you don't have to say a word. And our third point is it's not about us. Let's go ahead to our first point, which is relative to the subject. It's your time. That is, do what he says. Our first point focuses on moving too soon. I remember when I turned 15, I received my learner's permit, Mike, and I was excited because I could drive, but only with someone who was experienced riding with me. However, one day after church, I thought I was grown and I had my learner's permit. So I decided I would go tell the minister of music that I'd go move his car. And so he gave me the keys to his car, and I went out and I got into his car and I did everything I had been taught to do. I put on my seatbelt, I adjusted my mirrors, cut the car on, turned the ignition, and began to put the car in reverse. And I ended up doing something I did not expect. I went downhill real fast and back into a pole. And what I discovered there was that I was trying to move prematurely and do what I hadn't learned yet. Because although I had a learner's permit and I had been through driver's education, the only thing I had learned how to do is put the car in drive. Reverse hadn't been taught yet. Oh my goodness. You see, that's like some of us saved folk. You know, our faith is never about showing off when we make that point, because we think we're able to handle some things that we are not prepared for. Our faith is informed expectation, which means, yes, I know that I will hear from the Lord, and I have expectation that when he tells me what to do, and I do just what he says, that it will be for my good. However, I find myself sometimes trying to do things my way instead of waiting on his way. Stop trying to do things ahead of schedule in your life, and you'll discover that in due season, you'll be able to put your life in the proper gear. Some of us believe we are ready to pastor our own church, be leaders over ministries, and want promotion on the job we just started last week so that we can declare to others that we can handle some things. Notice in verse 11 that Jesus told the paralytic to rise up, take up his mat, and go home. Don't miss that, because, see, the paralytic never moved until he had received full instruction from Jesus. And if the paralyzed man doesn't move, although he can't move, until he gets everything from Jesus, knowing that he could move after having not moved for so long in his life, he was willing to wait and go the extra mile and be sure he heard everything that Jesus had to say to him. Then why shouldn't we? Hearing all that the Lord is telling you is for your good, and it will keep you from maneuvering the vehicle of your life without backing into the poles of your opposition. Don't you know that the Savior is trying to get you somewhere in your life, and he knows that you have been stuck in your rut, and you are tired of being carried by your situation, carried by your circumstances, and he will tell you how to get up. That's faith. What you do with your mat, that's responsibility. And go home. That's your opportunity to be a witness to your family and to the community, your friends, and peers, that he is Lord. Amen. Our second point has to do with you don't have to say a word. Our second point relative to the subject is your time is you don't have to say a word. And in the text, the only one who is speaking is Jesus. Check it out. If you go through verses 1 through 12, you'll find the only one speaking is Jesus. He speaks to the crowd, to the scribe, and to the paralytic. His words are not wasted, but they deal directly with what was needed needed to be handled based on who he was speaking to. Even when the paralytic gets up, takes up his mat, and goes home, his actions are not discussed, dialogue, or debated. He just does what Jesus said. Sometimes we mess ourselves up because we do more talking about what Jesus told us to do than doing what he said. And that's where we get in the way of what he's trying to do in our lives, and we wonder why some things in our lives never change.
That's right.
Oh my goodness. If we put more emphasis on doing what he says rather than spending our time talking about it, then we will be further along than we are. Can I tell you a story to kind of bring it home for you? There was a story of a pianist who was known for the gift of running his mouth. I said there's a pianist who was known for the gift of running his mouth. And he boasted over his ability to play the piano and about all the places that offered him to come and play. But however, he turned them all down because he said he was so good. So one day a newspaper reporter decided to show up and do an interview of the man. And while he sat down with the reporter, the pianist sat in front of the piano on his stool. And so as he began to talk with the reporter said, "How long have you been playing?" And therefore he went into a long dialogue about how long he had been playing. And after boredom set in with the reporter quickly moved down his page to the very last question, "Can I hear you play?" You missed it. Okay, see, sometimes you spend more time talking than necessary time putting into practice and the exercise of what you say you're able to do. And see, when the man who was on the mat understood what Jesus told him, he didn't have to tell nobody what he was able to do. He let his faith walk be louder than his faith talk. And that's what we have to understand in our lives, that when we allow ourselves to walk it out, we'll let him work it out.
That's right. Amen.
And so don't spend all the time trying to tell people what God has you ready to do and what God is telling you to do. Just get up and do it. And all they'll see is that God is able to do just what he said he'll do. So don't give up on God, because he has not given up on you, because he's able.
He's able.
Our third and final point relative to the subject is your time. It's not about us. When I read the last verse, my mind was blown away. You know, after his brother got up, took up his mat, and went home, the text says they were all amazed and they glorified God. The sequence of the response is what got me. It says those who were in the house, the crowd, the disciples, and even the scribes were amazed. The Greek says that they were astonished greatly. In other words, they just lost their mind. But even as they lost their mind, they glorified God. Don't miss that, because right there we understand that as they glorified God, they did not glorify Jesus, they glorified God. And I know that's probably messing y'all up, because we know Jesus is God, but here we see the Son of Man here on earth. And we see him before people who are seeking to see what he'll do, but also questioning what he's able to do. And so as this right here, we'll discover that if you go back to that verse 10:45, that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many, we'll discover and realize how it is that Jesus didn't trip out because he was not glorified, but he sat and remained quiet because God was glorified. That's an example for you and I right there. Don't be tripping because nobody called your name. Don't get upset because you weren't on the list. Just thank God that you were in a position where God could use you and that the glory went to him. You know, I'm a big sports fanatic, and one of the things I discovered when I watched sports is that when Michael Jordan won championships and when movie stars were doing things that would get them Oscars, or musicians wrote a score of music, there was something unique between the sports, the acting, and the music. That there was somebody had to do something to make the opportunity happen. In other words, they had to serve a purpose in somebody else's life for somebody else to get the recognition. And so the same thing is what Jesus does. And I'm so glad that Jesus was willing to be a servant of his Father. That through the Father, through the Son, we got to know the Father. And as we came to know the Father, then we would understand how the Son operated here on earth. And in his operation, he was more about giving God glory, and he was willing to come down through 40 and 2 generations to dwell among